welcome everyone to Downtime. Let's get that screen up there over Lance. How you doing, good sir?
Howdy.
So a new kink show. What would it be? BDSM time? I'm sure somebody will come up with something. Will a new kink show, not a new kind of show, a new kink show.
Kink show.
Yeah, and our first time, and I've seen a lot of thanks about this in the live chat, and I just wanted to say thank you guys so much. We are now monetized on this channel, and that changes everything. And one of the things that I've always felt like there's more freedom on this channel because it's not, so it's like we can sit here and do things that would demonetize in time, and we can just do it regularly here. It's like, who cares? So it's not monetized, so it doesn't matter. Now it's monetized, but on the flip side, this is still sort of like, when we want to do like okay, we're covering the invasion or the revolution or the whatever's happening, and all this serious stuff, and we can just sort of chillax a bit more on this channel, and I'm not as concerned about the monetization, but there's so much more in terms of what we can. I mean, they've started to release some of the restrictions. So, like, you couldn't pin chats. You didn't have a community page until you were monetized. We've now got all that. So it just makes things easier. It's not like we're looking to oh my God, we're going to break in the dough on overtime. But it's just better to be monetized. So thank you, everybody who helped with that, and it was a lot of people. Probably no one more than Titan, and certainly as a secondary, any of the mods that were doing both. Ali was there. Maya, a number of mods pulling their hair out with the Restream bot. I have called up Hillary and asked if she still has her copy of Bleach Bit, and we will introduce the Restream bot to that beautiful piece of software. We'll find a suitable torture for that, but that's now done. So thank you all for thank you all so much for your help in that, and I'm glad that's done. And I think that's easier to move forward.
Now I have to watch my parody mouth.
Yeah, well, I'm not. This is not the channel that's going to be bringing in all the super chats and everything like that. But it's nice that it can, and it's nice that we can do everything. Each channel is now equal. They can each do whatever. So we now, when placing a show and saying, is it going to go here or here, there are no concerns except what's best really for the audience and what's going to make sense with the division of the shows. That's it. Nothing else. We don't have to worry about, well, it can't be monetized and we can't do charity streams because can't do a charity stream if there's no income. We don't need to worry about any of that. All of that is covered. So it just makes everything so much easier. So perfect. All right. Well, it's been 2 weeks. So now you missed the last time. I decided that we were going to do the show anyway, but since you weren't there, I took both sides of the argument. You agreed with me on everything, which I appreciate. Yeah, you thought I was making brilliant comments, and I strawman.
Your insightful thoughts are always so impressive to me, Nick. Even when I don't know what you're saying, I'm impressed.
Well, thank you. Well, I assume that nobody knows what I'm saying about 50 to 60% of the time. So
you're just that way.
Yeah, you're just one of the ones that's nice enough to you know what? I'm going to assume it was brilliant because she says so for you brilliant things. It doesn't hurt to give them a mulligan here or there. But at any rate, yeah, it was. So, and I talked a lot about the sub, and we'll bring that up again because I wanted to ask your opinion on a few things. The sub is kind of old news by this point. It's not a big, well, it's. Yeah, well, I mean, there's issues about, well, should we really be spending all this money to rescue them when there was hope of a rescue? I never thought there was hope of a rescue. I thought the chances were 90% implosion. It's just take a look at exactly what happened. So, okay, when's it going to implode? On the way down, which is when they lost a signal. Did they surface? No, which means they didn't blow the emergency ballasts, which means they lost radio and the ability to blow those ballasts. Sounds like they imploded, but at any rate, I'm not the expert in ocean craft, but that was sort of my view. But I also, oh yeah, you had said how much that money could be spent helping people in Ukraine, which I think is an absolutely excellent point. But anyways,
just, feeding and housing the homeless here in the States or something, or wherever. It's kind of, to me, it was a pointless exercise. If you understand hydrodynamics at all, you kind of went, yeah, okay. It's nice to know them. Bye-bye.
Yeah, no, I didn't, and I caught some shit for that on Twitter. I'm bummed I don't get shit for anything now on Twitter. Twitter in the last 2 weeks has dramatically changed. I'm not getting any trolls on Twitter anymore. They've all vanished, and I find that odd. That's another topic for discussion. But Sinister Porpoise just said this. Are you saying that over time
migrated to Trump's thing?
Well, no, I think what it is, they are aggressively trying to monetize and make money. So I think if you don't have the blue check now, if you don't pay for that, you go to the back and nobody sees your comments, even if you're replying to people. So I've made some comments to a young Earth creationist. I've made comments to someone who denied evolution, someone who said that Russia was winning the war, and a few others. And on any other time, like if I had done that a month ago to even one of them, I would have been just spammed with so much reply. I haven't gotten a single reply from any of them. So I'm sitting there going, is this thing working? And then I realized it's got to be I think it's the blue check. I don't have the blue check. Now, 2 months ago, I was saying at some point I'm going to have to break down and get the blue check because we advertise the show on, and I have an online presence and a social. And at this point, I'm like, no, I will not give money to Musk under any set of circumstances. So, I'm not even convinced I'm going to stay on. Yeah, well, I'm still on, so I'm not. I haven't quit, but on the flip side, I will not. I will not pay for anything that goes to Musk, and so that's it. But it was like somebody flicked a switch. I've been commenting, I've been this and that, and nothing. It's like shouting out into the void. I was like, this is weird for Twitter. So I've been on Twitter a long time. It's the first time that's ever happened. I gotta tell you, I could sit there and say, I like milk in my cereal. If I just said I like milk in my cereal like a year ago on Twitter, I get 16 people telling me why I'm an asshole for that. I mean, I'm not kidding. And now it's like well, I'm an asshole, but for other reasons. The milk on cereal is just like, but it's, anyways, it's dramatically
beer on cereal. Everybody knows that.
Oh, well, that would dramatically. I gotta tell you, that would make me more excited to start my day.
I never eat cereal, right?
No, I'd be much more. I'd be like waking up like, oh God, I can't believe, is it Monday? Oh wait, Lynn said I could have beer with my cereal. Oh, it's time for breakfast. Better than coffee. I'd be out of bed like that. Yeah. So, anyways, I don't actually take it as a good sign. I think it's Musk really cementing the control, and I don't think he cares whether it's liberal or conservative. I just think he cares that they pay, and there's no. I was like, no, you can't. Nope. So, anyways, let's see. The biggie I wanted to talk to you about. Now we're going to have Operator Starsky on tomorrow, and so that's going to be our usual show. I think there's going to be a lot to talk about. A lot's been going on. There are people who have been saying too that the offensive has failed. Yada yada yada. I would like to get your view on that. And I think it's easier to have that view without Starsky here. But that notwithstanding, before that, everybody wants to know what happened with the coup. You and I have talked about it some, and I think we've been able to hash out a couple of theories. So I just wanted you to put forth what your theories are, and then maybe we can hash them out together. I think we've got a decent handle on it. Was one of two things, and I think we're roughly on the same page. So for people who are asking, we're dealing with a very limited set of information, but I think we've got a pretty decent idea. So for people who are saying, what the fuck happened, we can say, well, we think it's this. So what do you think?
Well, the first thing we need to agree on is what did happen.
Yeah, that's not going to be easy, is it?
No, I'm serious. I don't think we have a clear idea of what actually happened. Because there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, anecdotal evidence coming out of this is what happened, and then other things contradict it. So we're still kind of murky on it. What I feel comfortable saying that I know is that Wagner forces pulled out of the line near Bakhmut, and I think some of them were being held in reserve behind the 𝗲𝗲𝗆 positions. And they then rushed in, took over the main southern supply depot in Rostov, and then trucked north directly towards Moscow in a big column. Now, the numbers that people keep throwing out are it was about 25,000 troops involved in this.
And I'd like to point out one thing. Well, everything you've said so far is just a claim of what happened. You have, as of yet, I've noticed, not made any claims as to reasons why, just these are the facts that we have as to what happened. Is that correct?
That's all I'm doing right now is presenting.
Perfect.
Here's what we know or have a reasonably solid guess on what happened. So he only has about 25,000 troops. We know that not all of those are going up the highway because he has to leave some back to cover his base of operations and secure Rostov. And we know that they positioned a certain number of those troops to the east because they expected a column of additional, not their own people, but opposition forces coming from the direction of, say, Volgograd. So they left a significant force in the rear, and the other group headed north. So let's be generous and say he took about 15,000 men north. That's about a division. What happens next is really confused. We know there's some engagements. There's some discussion that maybe he seized a nuclear weapons storage facility. But we know that before they got to Tula, they stopped. And after a pause of a couple hours, they turned around and went back. That's what we know went on. And we know there were some small, minor engagements with security forces and that a few aircraft and helicopters were shot down. I'm not going to speculate on numbers, but we do know that some aircraft of some sort were shot down.
And now, can we say we know that he at least threatened the upper levels of the military establishment? Is that accepted in the things that we know? So whether he meant it or not, he did say it.
Right. The specific two names he dropped were I'm blanking on it now. Jeez.
Shoigu,
Shoigu and
Shoigu, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Blanking. Anyway, we know that he had said, yeah, I'm going to go in and hang those two from a lamppost kind of stuff. He curiously, at no point in that journey, ever said anything really hostile against Putin. It was all the king, or Tsar in this case, has surrounded himself with bad advisors, bad boyars, or manipulating the Tsar into doing things that I know are not right for Holy Mother Russia. So I don't think the coup was actually what he intended. I don't think he ever had designs on trying to overthrow Putin and install himself or some other shadowy figure who may be controlling him in the throne. So what I think he's really trying to do is to supplant the Russian military establishment, all those big shots at the center of the MOD, and get himself installed in that position, which then gives him control over all the forces, not just Wagner, but everybody. And when you have all that, then you potentially could do an actual coup, because realistically, 15 or 20,000 troops is not going to be enough to end the thing. You're not going to be able to have a successful coup.
Well, and to be fair,
so I think that was his goal.
he's got a military organization, and I've mentioned this before. He is not a political. He's not. He's got some political chops, but they're very low level compared to what you would need to actually run a country. Putin can run a country. He's qualified to run a country. Prigozhin is not. And, you know, he doesn't know how to run a country. He doesn't know how to engage in diplomatic or espionage or any of that. And he has no interest. I mean, he doesn't know, not because he's an idiot.
He is a true outsider in Russian politics.
So he doesn't, I don't think he wants to run Russia, and I don't think he has the capability of doing it. And if Wagner was all of a sudden just poof in charge of Russia, I think he'd be like, okay, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you're in charge. Well, you know, congratulations, because he can't even tell who's qualified.
Yeah, the analogy is that the dog that chased the car and actually caught it. What does he do with it?
yeah, there you go. All right. So thank you. I cut you off, but thank you.
No, that's fine. So that's what I think happened, and that's what I think his motivation was. Other things we suspect are true based on some of the information that has leaked out. First, a number of people in the establishment and high positions knew he was going to do this at least 48 hours before he actually started doing it.
Yes.
And there is some suspicion, I'm jumping ahead here, but bear with me. There's some suspicion that much of the purging that is supposedly going on right now is focused on those individuals, because by not informing the right authorities that this was coming, they are guilty as much as he was of doing it.
Yes.
And if you think back as an analogy, it's like the Valkyrie plot to assassinate Hitler. Well over half the people who were executed in the follow-on to that were people who literally had nothing to do with it. I mean, Rommel, for example, was forced to commit suicide because, you know, somebody had approached him at one time with not even a "will you join our coup," but it was this vague thing, and he said, no, I'm just the general in charge of the forces in France, so I don't want to get involved with politics back in Berlin. And that was enough to make him guilty in the Nazi establishment's eyes. So that's kind of what's going on here. Authoritarians can't ever stand or risk having potential disloyal people around them. It's just too damn dangerous. So that's why those folks are falling out of windows.
Yeah. So what got him to stop? I mean, I will say this. I don't think he's an idiot, so I don't think he would have gone forward unless he thought he had a chance of success, which means whatever happened had to come out of the blue in some way or another, or he was just drunk off his ass and then, you know, just like, hey, I was drinking vodka, I wake up one morning, I'm like, oh my God, I'm taking over the country. How did this happen?
I think and understand, he was not with the column.
Mm.
That's something that people don't really realize. He was not with the column.
Yeah, he stayed
was somewhere else. So the people leading the column are his core group of troops. These are combat veterans. They're not idiots. They may be brutal, sadistic assholes, but they're competent troops. I'm sure they had reconnaissance out ahead of the main column, trying to figure out where are we going to meet resistance and how much resistance is there. And I think that's what happened, is his recon people got up to about Tula, saw what was deployed there, and said, boss, this has no chance at all of winning, and we're not sure we want to go through with this anymore because we'll all die in what's about to happen.
Were there defenses?
So
I didn't know much about their defenses. All I knew was they deployed some tanks and roadblocks. But to the best of your understanding, their defenses were that good?
We don't know exactly what those defenses are, but we do know two things. Number one, Tula is controlled by a former bodyguard of Putin's. He's the governor general of that oblast. And he was chosen specifically for that position because it's one of those access points to get to Moscow. I'm sure that the other ones that are around the close approaches to Moscow all have trusted people in those slots. And they've been given additional funding to make sure that their National Guard forces are up to par. Plus, we know the Moscow garrison, which is 2 guard tank divisions, so effectively a corps, are in readiness. They're still fully equipped and ready to go. And I'm pretty certain at least one of those 2 divisions would have been deployed on that road to block that advance. And as we're seeing with the Ukrainians trying to assault positions now, it's really attacking is a difficult proposition. And I think that's probably, my guess, what happened, is that these guys saw it and said, we got to call this off. And you'll notice that's about when they stop. That's about when the negotiations apparently begin to take place in earnest, and suddenly it all just blows away like dust in the wind.
Yeah, and that's another conversation that's been happening. It's like, how can people just, there's a coup one day and the next day it's done and nobody talks about it. I was like, you don't know much about Russian culture, do you? Yeah, that's Tuesday. That's just, it's
just look up the Decembrists and see what they did to them, and you'll get an idea why saying, maybe this wasn't a bad idea is a good idea.
Like I said, 1984 was basically just like, read it. That's Russian culture. It's not really. Yeah, it's not that far-fetched. So, all right. So,
so I think they get to that point. The deal is made, and they pull back. Now, what's happening now? The aftermath of all this, which is leaving people very confused, is actually almost more understandable than the coup itself. Because it's that whole authoritarian regime. You can't leave potential threats in position where they could hit you again. So we already know, because there's been a couple of videos out about this, where mid-ranking officers are literally dragged out of their command bunkers, and some FSB guy puts a bullet in the guy's head right there. Bang. It's just, if you had anything to do with this, you're dead.
And there's no innocent until proven. It's guilty until proven innocent. You're not really given a chance to even try to prove it.
It's not even that. It's you're guilty. There's a very famous incident that occurred early in the Russian Revolution, after the Bolsheviks were in power, and Dzerzhinsky, who's head of the then NKVD, the Cheka, the secret police that becomes the KGB and today's FSB, he comes to Stalin with a list of names of people who are suspected of counter-revolutionary activity. They don't have any proof. There's nothing on it. Stalin glances at the list, initials the corner, and hands it back to Dzerzhinsky. Dzerzhinsky immediately turns around and tells his aide, have them all executed. I think the actual quote is, have them all shot. But regardless. And somebody takes Dzerzhinsky aside later and says, why did you order them all killed? Well, he signed the paper. Yeah, but Lenin initials everything he reads just so he knows he's already seen it. Don't you know that? He said, yes, but it's better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah.
That's the scenario. So I think there's a lot of that going on right now. So the rank and file guys probably don't have too much to worry about. The Wagnerites are going to be given a choice, I suspect, most of them, of either sign up for a 2-year contract with the Russian army, or we'll send you to Africa to serve Russia's interests as a private military corporation, now under new management with a new name. So essentially what they've been doing before. Any troops that expressed the slightest interest in defecting or joining the uprising, they're gone. You know, we need people to walk across that large empty field to see if there are any mines in it. Boom. Yeah, there are. Keep going. We need to clear those mines out, boys.
Well, and this is what
I'm kidding. That's what they did.
Oh, I don't. I know you're not.
Battalions.
And one of the things, I mean, we've talked about this before. It's there is a genuinely different mindset. The Russian mindset really is that life doesn't have much value. They don't see value in life sort of the same way we do, and it's sort of like, well, if you know, yeah, if it really is okay, especially in defense of the country, to kill, you know, 3 marginally or most likely innocent people if you get the one guy that was going to, you know, flip because you can't have even a single.
Yeah.
And so it's and we've already seen too that they use. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I wrote this to you earlier, but I wanted to say it for the audience right now. The other thing you'll notice is you see some of the videos of the column moving up that road from Rostov toward Moscow. And there are people waving flags and cheering them on as they're driving up the road. Except you'll notice that those crowds are there at, you know, I think it was like 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning when all this was going on. So they're not big crowds. They're small groups of people, and they're kind of celebrating because they think a new strongman has arisen. And it's important to show your loyalty to the new strongman. And then as soon as Prigozhin stops the column, suddenly everybody goes back inside and you don't see anybody. And nobody ever heard of this uprising. What? When did this happen? I've never heard about it. Tell me more. You know, it's the Russian psychology of no man on the street is ever going to rise up and complain and try to change things, because they know from very long historical experience, going back hundreds of years, that's a quick way to die. So instead, they wait for somebody to come and tell them that there's been a change. And then once they feel, oh, okay, yeah, that's happening, I'll get out and tell him I'm now his loyal follower.
And it's bizarre. I remember, so as you know, I was in the Soviet Union for a month. And I remember speaking to one of the families that was hosting us for a period and saying, like, you know, don't you realize that you're lying? This is a lie. When you, Nick is no lie, and they really, it's not lying to them, because it's sort of this cultural thing where just everybody knows it, and it's not even meant dishonestly. It's just the way you do business. A lie is where you're deliberately deceiving someone. Like, we're not deceiving anyone. It's this shared delusion that they all have. They all accept that they have. So there's nothing unethical, immoral, or it's just life. And it takes some getting used to and being able to wrap your head around the fact that that's just the way it is. And it's, it's, so you see this and you're like, yeah, that's yeah, you can do that in Russia. They don't have a free press, so it doesn't. There's no way to say anything different.
I think the big question is, where do we go from here? And I think the uprising, I don't want to call it a coup, and when I do call it a coup, I typically put it in quotes. The uprising gives Putin carte blanche to clean house. Anybody who was too powerful or too connected for him to eliminate directly now can be accused. Worst case, show trial, best case, nobody says anything, and they're pushed aside, and you bring in another guy that you have more confidence in. And by confidence, I mean confidence that they will be loyal to you. They don't have to be competent, and that's another thing that a lot of people really need to understand. The guys who are going to be appointed to replace Shoigu, Gerasimov, for that matter, Prigozhin, or any of these other guys that are going to be purged, and whether purge means, they fall out a window or go for a walk in the woods and don't come back, or simply are encouraged to retire or are given a new assignment somewhere in eastern Siberia. Regardless, when they're pushed aside, new loyals come in. They're not being chosen because they're good at their jobs. That is the least concern of anybody in power in Russia right now. It's making sure that the guy who's in that slot is somebody who is absolutely 100% trustworthy and loyal to the boss. It's a criminal syndicate is what it is.
That's a great way to put it. Well, and in fact, competency is in fact often distrusted because it's sort of like, okay, who are you trying to show off to? Who are you trying? What game are you trying to pull that you're trying to actually be good at this? What are you missing in life that it sparks a sense of there's got to be. So if somebody's competent,
there's an ulterior motive for being competent. That's
exactly.
Because if you were like us, you'd be corrupt as hell. You'd be stealing your troops and your units blind and selling it all on a black market somewhere. And the fact that you're not, that your troops are actually well-trained and well-supplied, you must be plotting something. I don't know about what it is, but I can't trust you.
And Wagner just played right into that. I mean, this is just more evidence of you cannot trust anybody who's good at something. You just, it's Serpico, right? It's just like, there's a cop who's not on the take. We better find a way to make him have an accident because we can't have somebody who has integrity around here. That's a big no-no.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I love this. Because like I said, I studied Russian culture. I learned the language. I went over there for a while. When I came back, I'd tell people this. My father had been in Russia. He studied the language and culture, so he got it. Nobody else did. And if you try to tell somebody else this, like, oh, that's just U.S. propaganda. I was like, no, this is what I learned. The U.S. propaganda is 1/10 of what bad it really is. I was like,
the intelligence community literally couldn't believe that they were that inept and that corrupt. They're obviously hiding something. They have to be better than this because otherwise the country would fall apart. It would implode. Well, in 1989, you may recall, it did.
Well, and it's come so close so many times, and it's always been just teetering on the edge of for so long. Yeah. And the reality is they don't count on, they count on, it's what you said earlier, they count on the sheer numbers. So they don't have the competency, they don't have the skill, but they do have the sheer numbers of people who will, listen, we need to find the enemy positions. We know the enemy's either there, or there. So could you guys just walk out? And after they shoot and kill you, we'll know where they are. And it's like that works there because they all, if they don't do it, they know they're going to get shot, and they know there's no value on rights or any of this kind of stuff. So you're stuck doing it, and then it's the almost endless horde of. That's why the orcs analogy actually kind of works. It took me a little while before I was like, yeah, that really kind of does. It's just the brainless mob that just keeps coming. You may be the best with the weapons, but they ain't gonna stop. It's an interesting way to fight. It's a different way, and it has had its advantages to some extent, in my view.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonably good analogy.
So,
go ahead.
Well, so I remember when this had happened and everyone was kind of disappointed, and I said, look, I'm disappointed too, because I figured if there's a war happening in Russia, in Moscow, no less, that is about one of the best things that could happen for Ukraine. So I was hoping for the best or for the worst or whatever you call it. And when it didn't happen, I was disappointed. But either way, I think it's nothing but good news for Ukraine. There are semi-competent and semi-experienced people that are now getting purged and replaced with people just out of the academy who, again, just loyal. And it's doing nothing but, yes.
Right, but and this is almost as important, are going to be very hesitant to take independent action for fear that if they do without getting direction from above, they are going to be seen as being traitors to the regime somehow. So everything will be delayed. It's like when the Allies land in Normandy, nobody has the balls to go in and wake Hitler up to tell him the Allies are landing. And so for roughly 6 hours, all the troops that are, all the panzer divisions that are supposed to react and rush to the beachhead and throw the Allies back into the sea are sitting around going, can we go? Can we go? Can we go?
Well, and the same thing when Hitler invaded Russia. Stalin locks himself in his office for 2 weeks, and people are like, well, do we defend the country? Well, Stalin hasn't said we defend the country, so, we're just going to wait, because if you take the initiative, if you're wrong, they're going to shoot you. If you were right, there's still a 50-50 they're going to shoot you because you still took the initiative, which is a bad fucking thing, even if you were right.
Exactly.
It's the heroes of Russia. The people who get the medals are the ones who are loyal. That's why you're right. It's the criminal organization. It's the guys who kept their mouths shut, did what they were told, no matter, and thought were successful at the doublethink. Right? The people who I believe it because I've been told to believe it, and the people who can most say that, they're the ones who get the medals.
Did you see my? Yeah. Did you see my post in Discord about the 6 phases of a project?
I did not. I see you put in a lot, and I've been sort of half catching up, but I did not see that one.
So this is kind of a joke in the military, the 6 phases of projects. So the first stage is enthusiasm. The second stage is disillusionment. The third stage is panic. The fourth stage is a search for the guilty. The fifth stage is punishment of the innocent. And the sixth stage is rewards for those who weren't involved. and my quip at the time when I posted that was, I think the Russians have just entered phase 4. Punishing... it's just crazy.
Oh, dear Lord. Well, so I think, okay, so this is helpful because they're culling a number of people, some of whom actually have skills, and replacing them with people who, at a minimum, at best case scenario, are no better than the people who they replace, and are probably worse. A lot of the generals are going to have to go. The people who come in are, I have to believe it's not great for morale when the reason you were promoted isn't because, like, hey, we just saw your skills and we think that you'd be great in this position, but because your predecessor was hung, shot, stabbed, whatever, by your own side, and they're like, oh, hey, look, a position has just opened up here as general or commander, why don't you have a seat? And
well, the one I think is interesting is the guy who's supposedly, by Kremlin watchers, that's don't bet any on this, but the guy who's supposed to allegedly replace Shoigu as Minister of Defense is the guy that I was telling you about earlier, who is Putin's bodyguard, who's now the Governor General of Tula. So they're taking a guy who has no military experience whatsoever, and they're going to put him in charge of the entire Russian army which is in the process of losing a war in Ukraine. That's going to end real well. I'm sure it is.
Yeah, that's worst job on earth, right? Probably right above, just like a hair inch above, lawyer for Donald Trump. So it's a race on that one. It's a horse race as to which one's worse. So now there are people who say, and we've seen a lot of this in the news, that Putin is greatly diminished. It seems to me that he is some. It's shown that it could maybe almost kind of work, but he's got a credible argument for, except it didn't work, and it's never going to work, and I've just killed anybody who was even remotely involved in it, so that anything short of another oligarch really taking a stab at it, nobody's even going to whisper about, crossing.
Right, but that's the issue, is he has now been made to appear weak. It's strictly perceptual. He probably, if anything, is in a stronger position than he was previously. But the appearance of weakness sets the stage for those around him who are nervous they may be next on the purge list to start seriously thinking about, how can I make this work to my advantage and get rid of this guy before he moves against me? So it's not that he's in a worse position. It's not that things are falling apart, but it's the serious start of people looking around going, is it time now?
It's gotta, if you're one of the oligarchs, it's gotta be reaching a point where, I mean, there was a march on Moscow that would unsettle me if I was one of them. They've got more money than God, most of them. The only thing they're worried about is someone coming up and killing them. Dual questions here. You are head of Ukraine. What do you do now? And then you are Vladimir Putin. What do you do now?
Let's do the first one, or the second one first.
All right.
And we'll talk about Ukraine and what the situation is. So if you're Putin, optimally, how I would advise him if I were, his trusted right-hand man.
And in that mindset, we're also assuming it's not just you, but you in that mindset, because I know you'd be like, listen, hang it up. NATO's going to wipe you out eventually.
Yeah.
Let's just,
you can't say that. You can't say that.
Yeah.
But I think the key is that you start seriously looking for an exit strategy. And believe it or not, if he handled this correctly right from the start, he may still be able to pull it off, but I doubt it. But if he'd handled it correctly from the start, he could have said, now we know why the Ukrainians were defeating us. Because there was so much corruption from top to bottom in the military. All the senior generals were corrupt. The PMCs were corrupt. The Ministry of the Interior is corrupt. Corruption is ruining us. Perhaps we should step back and put Ukraine on the back burner. Maybe give them some of what they want, but at least sort of try to exit out of this situation so we can deal with the true problem, which is the enemies within.
And then he gets to do his mission.
What the whole thing about the Great Purges was.
George W. Bush, the mission accomplished. You will give him an aircraft carrier, and Putin can glide in on a thing and say, you know what? We went in to save Russia, and we did save Russia. Not by purging the Nazis. It turns out the Nazis were actually these members of our party. They are now gone. You're welcome.
Yeah.
All right.
And he could turn it in that direction. Personally, I think the timing for that is now past. I don't think he can do that anymore. But thinking on his feet, he could have done that. He could have figured it out. Instead, I think we're going to see the war continue to drag on until another, this time more serious attempt is made by somebody in Russia to unseat him. The war, as we've said many times on this show, I don't see the war ending as long as Putin is in power. It just can't.
Well,
he could wake up tomorrow and say, "Oh, okay, we'll give the Ukrainians what they want. We quit. We're done." But that's not in his nature, because the moment he does that, he again paints himself as weak. He again exposes himself, and at that point, he becomes the one who's the dagger in the back, the stab in the back, who ruined Russia and such. And he can't allow that to happen, so he has to stay in. And it's going to take somebody making him go away in one way or the other.
And even with this he's got this almost pre-made exit strategy, but I think his arrogance, he won't take it, because he'll know that he wasn't able to take Ukraine, which he should have been able to just take like that, because he's Putin, and I think he'd be happy to risk his life and his regime at a serious shot of ending Ukraine by this point. I don't think he would have originally. If you had said this is what it was going to cost him, he'd rethink it. But now that he's in, it doesn't matter how many exit ramps he gets or how many opportunities he gets to blame someone else and bail. He just knows if he thinks and wishes this hard enough, he can find a way to beat Ukraine, and I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah.
All right, so you're in charge in Ukraine. Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say, okay, so now let's look at this question from the other side. For the Ukrainians, and this will go to one of the other questions, if you will, that you were hinting at earlier. For the Ukrainians, this was an opportunity while the Russians were fully focused on another problem to take advantage of it. I think they did and didn't do that. I think they continued to push as they're doing. That steady pressure is creating cracks in the Russian defenses. I know everybody's still sitting here going, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? And it'll happen when the timing is right. They're not going to be stupid and throw everything in until those conditions are met. So I think that's what's going on there. And for Zelensky and his crowd, I think if they capitalize on the doubt and uncertainty that this created, if they start trying to turn up the volume inside Russia, and we know they have contacts within Russia about the anger and frustration about how the war is going. You don't even have to make it, you're murdering innocent Ukrainians. It's just, we're losing the war because this guy's an idiot. We need to make him go away. If you continue to kind of nudge that edge, you have accomplished a lot. Even if it doesn't cause one soldier to come off the front lines, it's yet another seed of doubt in their minds about what they're fighting for. We know morale and motivation at the front in the Russian army is for crap right now. And every little grain of sand you sprinkle into that oyster shell might generate the pearl that's needed to escape from this mess.
We also learned that it looks like Ukrainian intelligence was working Prigozhin. How much, we don't know, or at least I wasn't. We may have had a better understanding than I've seen, but we're aware that they had actually been pushing Prigozhin to do this in a way which has been perceived by some to have been part of why he did it. Do you know anything about how much Ukrainian intelligence was involved in getting Prigozhin to do this?
Read my book that I'll write in about 30 years and you'll know everything.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to seeing that. I will put that right up on my shelf next to my history with walruses, a memoir by a memoir by Commander Lansman.
The Ukrainian intelligence isn't going to tell us anything they don't want to tell us. So if something is leaking out saying that they were the ones prompting Prigozhin, they're doing it for their own reasons. Whether it's true or not, we have no way of knowing. And honestly, even if it isn't true, making people think that now makes everybody in Russia more nervous that the Ukrainians are far more subtle than we thought.
Hadn't even thought of that. That's one of. I'm great.
So doubt and confusion. That's what you do.
I am great at the surface level stuff and like taking like 3 million bits of information and putting it all together. But then it's like I talk to you. It's like, why is it? It's like, let's assume they didn't do it. Wouldn't they still? I was like, whoa, that mystifies me every time. I'm like a kid, you do the thumb trick too, you're like, oh, and it's like, and I'm like,
how did you do that? Well, I'll give you the story that is from my father's past.
Mm-hmm.
In 1974, when a Greek military junta sponsored a coup against the elected government in Cyprus, and the Turks were all upset because the Greek population were being incited to murder Turks and such, the government of Russia hinted to a reporter that they would happily send 50,000 Russian troops to go to Cyprus with the Turks to end the problem. They never had any intention of doing this. There was no offer ever actually made. But just by making that claim in a very indirect and non-attributable manner, everybody in NATO went crazy. It was like the Russians are trying to start a war between the Greeks and Turks, which will fracture NATO to its core, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was just that quiet little seed of doubt that created all sorts of chaos.
For those, I'm I'm a Star Trek buff, and some for me, DS9 was always hit or miss, but it just reminds me, I won't get too much into it. Inside joke, if you're a Star Trek buff, Elam is Garrick. There's a tailor on the station that everyone's reasonably sure is a spy, and you finally realize he just has to be because he just knows too much. And yet on the flip side, he's always so good at just being a tailor. It's really kind of weird. It's very well done. But in the end, he tells all these stories about a spy named Garrick. Named Elam. And what you find out, and what happened to the spy, and how the spy ended up getting exiled, and all of these other things. And what you realize is Elam is Garrick's first name. And since everything the guy says is a lie anyway, you still don't really know what happened, but you realize that the tailor, really has confessed to being a spy. But anyways, all right. Well, thank you. I think we've got that all covered. Unless there's anything else that you thought was worth hitting. I think there's any number of other things
not on that particular topic. Did you want to talk about something else?
Well, I like I said, the implosion of the ship to some extent. Like I said, that's kind of old news, and I at least got to have my say. Again, you agreed with everything I said, thought it was brilliant. It was on the last show. I think everyone watching here, they can remember that. And I made it crystal clear that you weren't there. And I thought it was unfair to have a debate or discussion with you without you being there. So I represented you. What I really should have done is put me in the other camera and just let's have the dual conversation. But at any rate.
All I will say about it as a post-mortem is that the more information that comes out, the more obvious it becomes that they were taking extremely dangerous shortcuts on safety because it simply cost too much. The whole idea was to generate profits for his investors. And I hate to say it this way, but in some ways he got his just desserts, because if you're going to be that kind of callous about people's safety, then I think it's entirely fitting you die by your own hand, so to speak.
It's rare.
The fact that he took some innocent people with him, that's tragic.
It's rare you see that kind of justice anywhere in this life. Yeah. But if anybody was going to say, it's like it was him. It's like, wow, okay, that maybe karma really is a thing. There's been a lot of people who said, other than the young boy who was the only true innocent, no, I think everybody there was an innocent except for the CEO. And the reason is, like, yeah, but how could you know? Why would you think the submarine was safe? Well, because James Cameron did it. And I know that sounds like a dumb argument. It may be a dumb argument. But if you're sitting there and you want to, if
you look at Cameron's machine as opposed to this one, it's like,
yeah, but if you're sitting there saying
there's a difference.
Well, the other thing is, but if you read the literature, so I read all the literature that they put out on it, and they're like, oh, it's this revolutionary new material, which to some extent it really was. The problem wasn't that the material itself was not capable of handling the depth. The problem was it was not resilient. So every time you dove to basically any depth, when you came back up, you would weaken it by several hundred feet at a minimum. So it didn't matter. You didn't have to go to the bottom. You just had to go down, more than, say, 1,000 feet, and you were now weakening the hull for the next trip. So, but they didn't put that in the literature, believe it or not. So when you're reading this is why you should join us, and if you read what they're saying about the material and how revolutionary it is, and then you find out that the CEO is going with you on the trip, I have to say that would assuage most of my fears. I'd feel much more comfortable, and I'd say, well, we've been doing this now for so long. The technology has gotten so much more advanced than Cameron.
False advertising.
Yeah. So I'm not as I think the only one to really blame is the CEO and anyone who knowingly fired the technicians who raised the false alarm. And I get blaming them. We all wish we had that kind of money to just blow on something really stupid like going down to see the Titanic.
If you want to diverge from this subject,
please.
I would say that is an ongoing and worsening problem in the U.S. with most industry. Is that increasingly all the company looks at is the bottom line. It doesn't matter how many people are put at risk, killed, injured, poisoned, whatever, by their activities, because they know they can tie that thing up in court for forever and they won't have to lose a penny over it over the long run. So I think, this is me, but in the Navy, there's a standard concept, which is that regardless of what happens, the captain is ultimately responsible for what happens on his ship. And he suffers if something goes wrong. If the ship runs aground and he wasn't on the bridge, well, he should have been on the bridge. That's the captain's job. If there's a fire in the galley and a person gets killed, well, he wasn't in the galley, yeah, but he's supposed to make sure that the galley is run safely and safety inspected, and he's ultimately responsible. And I would love to see that concept ported over to the way large corporations are run, which is that the board of directors, not the CEO necessarily, but the board of directors are ultimately responsible for what happens with their company, regardless of who truly is to blame. Because if they were doing their job properly, they'd be getting people into those jobs, not that maximized profit, but did things properly and safely.
Yeah, I think it was. It wasn't Citizens United. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's best to approach this from a tort reform problem or it wasn't Citizens United, and I'm sure someone in the live chat will be able to refresh my memory as to which one it was that said that basically if you work for a company that is held publicly, your first duty is to the stockholders, which actually doesn't sound idiotic like on the real surface layer, because it's like, okay, the stockholders are the actual owners, so of course your duty is to the owners, but that still isn't really, though they're absent owners. They're there only because they're expecting a profit.
In large part, that may have been true back when. But today, what you're really saying when you say that is the company is responsible to the hedge fund managers.
Yes. That's even better. Yeah,
that's where all the money is that finances this kind of activity, and those guys have no qualms whatsoever about what happens on their watch, because they can't be touched. They're so disconnected from whatever's there. They have no responsibility. In fact, they actually win when the company goes out of business, because they can rape the company and take all that money for themselves.
Yeah, they're going to be the first ones paid.
You want true reform in this country? Shoot a hedge fund manager.
Okay. Now, okay. One step back. I would like to. I know
I'm being absurdly overreacting. I'm not even being facetious, and you know that. But
I do know that. Yes, but I'm going to say it anyway because
at the same time I need. Yeah, I know. But that's the reality: is that we need to do something about this disparity of wealth and start getting it back to where companies were owned by lots of people who owned small amounts of the stock in the company, as opposed to where it is now, where some big investment firm owns 70% of the damn company. That's the problem.
Yeah. So, any thoughts on how you do that? Now, obviously, I just realized I said that. And I was
Republicans.
Like, that's
Supreme Court in effect. I can go on for most of the evening if you'd like.
I was like, well, there's so many ways to unpack that. I was like, dude, as soon as I said that, there was this little voice in my head that goes, "Did you just really ask that fucking question?" I was just like, "Did you really? Is that the road you want to go down?" Listen, if you're free for the next 18 or 19 days,
the sleeping dog. Don't get Lance to go off on a ride.
Oh well, I'm perfectly fine on that. It's just I don't know that I have 18 or 19 days to unpack this with you. So, oh dear Lord. Okay, let me rephrase that. Is there a point at which there was any piece of legislation? For me, it was the legislation that said that if you work for a company, your first duty is to the fiduciaries of that company. So for me, that was like, oh, that's a really bad idea. That's a really bad idea, because then as long as you were doing that, it doesn't matter if you ordered 16 babies thrown into vats of acid to be, as long as you were doing that, you're basically immune from. And it's not quite that cut and dry, but that ain't far off either. So
if it makes money for me, it's okay that you do that. If you have a Bhopal and kill how many ever 100 people it was because you release a toxic cloud into the air over this town, who cares? They're just people on another continent, And it's that kind of callous, who gives a damn, and nobody getting held responsible kind of thing that just, I'll be polite, irks the heck out of me.
If there's no immediate solution from the government, obviously it's not going to come from the Supreme Court anytime soon. Too many people who are elected owe their election to hedge funds and various corporate interests. Is it ever going to come from people deciding that maybe money isn't the most important thing in life, or is that not a realistic expectation for Americans in this generation?
It's not realistic. The way we have to start fixing the problem is to overturn Citizens United. That's the primary first stepping stone. Without that, the gap between the shore where we are now and where we need to get to is simply too far to get to the next stepping stone. That stepping stone is the crucial step to getting anything accomplished.
Well, and Dodd-Frank has also been eviscerated, which is terrifying for any number of reasons, but not the least of which is that may actually solve our problem. Because I think you and I have talked about this briefly, but one of the things I often say, and I just see I'm being tagged in the live chat a lot, so I'm going to go look at the live chat in just 1 minute. But either we're saying something people like or something they really hate, and I'll find out in a sec. But oh dear Lord, I just lost my own train of thought. I interrupted myself. I hate it when I do that.
I missed the train.
Oh, yeah.
Don't worry, there'll be another one on in a couple hours.
One of the things, so I'm very interested in economics. I am not an economist, but I'm a little bit of an autodidact, and I can hold my own with most economists in narrow areas. And I took a look at 2007, 2008, and I also looked at the leverage that this actually gave countries, especially China, over the U.S., where China could have just said, "Oh, do we want to end the U.S. or not?" Now, it would have been economic catastrophe for them, but they could have done it. They absolutely could have done it. And between that and just how close, we were about 24 or 48 hours from the U.S. being wiped out. And I mean the United States basically just not existing anymore, because if there is no economy until everybody reorganizes everything from the ground up, which would end up meaning new government, it's not the United States anymore. The United States is gone. And we were about 24, 48 hours from that. And I think most people don't understand really how bad it got. The whole purpose of Dodd-Frank was to prevent it from ever being able to get that bad again, where the economic leverage of a corporation or of multiple corporations that are, quote, too big to fail is so large that it exceeds the leverage of the U.S. government financially, which means that either the U.S. government must bail them out, or if the U.S. government does not hold a gun to another corporation's head and say, well, you're bigger than us, so you're going to bail them out. If we don't find something like that, everything goes. And so that's now been removed. Those protections have now been removed, which absolutely terrible thing.
They were inconvenient to the companies.
Yeah. Which may mean that, I don't want that to be the catalyst for changing everything, but it's hard to imagine much short of that. We really did not learn anything from the last time, which is, of course, moral hazard, and was the whole argument for possibly letting UBI fail and any number of others fail that we didn't. I'm going to read the live chat for a minute. You agree with everything? It's like, yeah, we're basically fucked. It's like, okay.
No, I honestly, I think we are. I think we need to semi-implode for the people to get angry enough that we end these deliberately divisive policies that are being enacted by corporations. All they're doing is serving to concentrate more and more and more power and wealth in the hands of a very, very few people. And, effectively, they're moving us back to a feudal autocracy. And they love that just fine. And, it's time for the old peasant rebellion.
Is there any way, and I'm not suggesting we're talking communism or socialism but is there any way to avoid that in a capitalist society, or is it where it's just we need a mixed, like a Keynesian model?
I think capitalism is fine if it's closely regulated. If you can keep it from becoming predatory capitalism, and that is what we have become today. And if you orient capitalism so it's more focused on the small guy being protected and being allowed to conduct business, and you start taking these giant mega corporations that dominate everything and taking them out of the picture as movers and shakers and influencers, that's the way you can do it. But since the American political system in its current form is effectively controlled by those same corporations, that's not going to happen.
There's a movie. It's not one of my favorite movies, but for what it does, it is, which is Any Given Sunday. And the reason one of the things I love about Any Given Sunday is the tension between what's best for the individual versus what's best for the team. And constantly people who are operating more on, hey, I'm going to try to get more yards, try to get my stats up so that I can make more money next year. And versus, yeah, if I get a few fewer yards but get out of bounds, I can do what's better for the team. And so the team players versus the individuals, and there was a reason I wanted to talk about that tension, and I don't remember. I'll probably remember when I get to some of these. They're not super chats. Sorry,
let us mourn Nick's poor lost brain cell.
I know. I'm. Hey, listen. I am so much more cogent right now than I was even just a few hours ago. And believe me, as soon as this is done, I'm going to be like, "Did I stream today? I gotta go. What's overtime? I gotta go on with Lance." But Sister Porpoise said, "Okay. Oh yeah, the Amazon warehouse where the workers were killed because their bosses wouldn't let them leave. There was a tornado warning. The official." There was a number of best practices in case of
Amazon workers not being allowed to take bathroom breaks.
Yeah. And
people not being allowed to open the doors when the AC failed so that there's, they're getting heat exhaustion because, that would allow pilferage. You can't have that. Everybody loves to take on Amazon. I have mixed feelings about Amazon. I know a lot of people hate Amazon. I'm not a big fan, but at the same time, I worked with a couple of people who were in small companies, basically 10 employees at max. But they said for them, Amazon was kind of a godsend because it allowed them to get product, the visibility where it would never have gotten it if they were just doing direct online sales themselves. Once you got it there, even though you weren't making enough, as much money as you did when you sold it yourself, in some cases, they were actually losing money by selling through Amazon, but it got them the attention and customer interest that directed them back to their website for stuff that they didn't sell through Amazon. And so, it's a mixed blessing, I think. But again, I do think, the way Amazon has run so much of its business is literally criminal.
Well, and it's one reason it's successful, right? I mean, there are many ways to beat your competition, but one of them is to find ways not to be burdened by the same restrictions that they are. I think the other one, especially during COVID, but any time when it's like, there are people who have to go into work when they're sick, and it doesn't matter that it's worse for society. It doesn't matter that it damages more businesses, and it's irrefutably a net loss to the American taxpayer, to the American culture, to everything. When people who are sick come into work, especially if they work in like if they're waiters, waitresses, if they work in any of the service industries, they come in sick, but they have to because if they take a day off, they're going to be replaced by someone who won't take that sick day. So and plus
their pay is often so low that if they miss that day and it's not covered by some sort of sick leave policy, and often it isn't, then they're not going to be able to put food on the table or make rent that month. And at the same time, the CEO is buying his third yacht this year. There's something wrong with that kind of disparity. But if you try to change it, and the CEO gets less money and you give more money to the workers, then everybody who's a shareholder in the upper tiered categories of shareholders gets very upset because they're losing a quarter of a penny on the dollar of dividends this year.
Well, and I very firmly believe in a number of the conservative arguments about how and why we have to offer competitive pay and so on and so forth. This isn't competitive pay. This passed competitive pay by an order of magnitude, probably 15 or 20 years ago. It's not competitive pay. When a CEO can write into their contract that if I run this company into the ground, I'm going to be the first one paid out, you are fundamentally undermining everything that conservatives presumably care about in terms of having stable companies.
My favorite is the guy who gets more in a bonus when they have to fire him than he would get if he was doing the job properly and got to stay there. So it's almost incentivizing corruption and failure.
Well, and this was what Greenspan actually wasn't, I think, terrible, although he was awfully, he was too far on the I was going to say neoliberal side. But I love his genuine shock when the system failed. He goes, all our models said that this couldn't happen. No, all the neoliberal models said this couldn't happen. Everybody else was sitting there saying this is going to happen, and he's like, well, and he admitted under duress that the models were wrong and that he had been wrong, and he didn't understand why. And sort of like, well, it's actually really simple, especially if you use even their own neoliberal models, which is that if you incentivize, if you tell the CEO that he is going to get dividends based on how well the stock does at any given point, and he's going to get a huge bonus when he leaves the country. Yeah, which they often do too.
Kind of the same thing.
When he leaves the company, then he's incentivized to do massive short-term boosts to the stock at the cost of any long-term gain.
Long-term.
Yeah, just undermine everything that builds long-term stability in the company. Know for a fact you're destroying the company, but if you can goose the stock for 5 years, then bail, then you can get another job at another company to do the same thing, because you can say, hey, when I left the company, the stock was higher than ever, but you did that knowingly undermining, then that business fails, you get your golden parachute, and you are now paid to do it again. Yeah, oh, good.
It's worse because the board of directors wants those kind of people running the company. They want to maximize their profits now. If the company goes bust, they can unload all that stock for whatever garbage price they do, and they still come out ahead. And the people who buy the stock thinking, oh yeah, this company was doing real well last quarter, they're stuck with useless paper. But it's not the rich guy who's hurting, it's some poor other schlub.
Yep. It was, I think, and it wasn't the sort of comeuppance of watching Greenspan testify to Congress. It was the fact that he was genuinely confused. It was the fact that he's just like, I don't know how the fuck this happened. He's like the genius of, and it's like,
it's like Putin when he gets told, oh yeah, we'll overrun Ukraine in 3 days.
Yes.
They'll welcome us with bread and salt and sunflowers. And, okay, that's the propaganda line, and you still were dumb enough to buy your own propaganda?
Oh,
are you insane? And the answer is yes.
Oh, dear Lord. Oh, all right. Well, I'm thinking we're going to wrap it up. I think it was awesome. I had a lot of fun. Is there anything, any topics? I mean, I'm not like in urgent situation. I'm not like, oh dear, the kids are ramming down the door. But
look at the time.
Was there anything else you wanted to touch on or thought we should talk about?
No, not really. I mean, I'm more than happy to sit around and shoot the bull, but if you've got nothing else to say,
I certainly got a few minutes. I don't want. I don't want to. I mean, there's. I just want to make sure, we have something to talk about. But usually, what I've noticed is, after about 5 minutes, you and I will find something to talk about.
Oh yeah. Kind of.
So Dave put in the live chat, do you think the Supreme Court should add another 2? And I suspect I know your answer to that, which is no. They should add another 5 or 7. But
no, I think what the Supreme Court should do, or should have done to it, if you will, is number one, they need to be answerable to somebody. Because technically speaking, right now, these are people who could literally go out and shoot somebody in Main Street. And once the case got up to the highest level, you acquit yourself. It's insane. 2, they need to have some sort of way of not getting people to be able to sit on the bench indefinitely. I think there has to be some sort of term on it. I'm not saying they need to be voted, but I do think there has to be some sort of control on how long people can stay there. We've had people that we know have been on the court that are not mentally capable of doing the job, who've just sat there because they didn't feel like retiring because they liked the prestige.
That's what's really kind of weird.
The idea of packing the court makes me really nervous because, okay, we had 2 new justices this year. What happens in 4 years when the Republican comes into office? He's going to say, well, now they have a majority, I've got to add 2 more. And pretty soon, everybody ends up sitting on the Supreme Court because, you know, we kept adding 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 or whatever every year. It's stupid.
Well, I think we have to add more because I think that will naturally increase diversity over time. And I think that, you know, it's too powerful for such a few number of people. But I also think the only way to do it is to either agree that the President of the United States gets to nominate and pick a Republican, whoever the highest ranking Republican is, gets to nominate, and they each either do something where it's power sharing, they each get their nominations through or fail together, and you do that for however many, or you say 2 every term, regardless of who wins, just for the next 5 years, 2 every term. And, you know, both sides agree to that. You put it in writing, and then, you know, if the Republicans end up winning 2 or 3 terms in a row, well, that's the way that the cookie crumbles. And if it's the Democrats who win the presidency for the next however, you know, do that. But I think it's way too few people on the court as it is. There isn't enough of a diversity of opinions to be able to feel comfortable in them reach, and 1 or 2 ideologues can just change way too much on that court.
Well, the other side of that question is that there have been, I would say, probably since Reagan was in office, there have been certain key issues that are the determining factor on whether or not you get seated. And, you know, abortion is one, racial issues or what have you or another, all those touchy topics. And the guy will literally stand up in front of Congress and say, no, I do not have any preformed opinions on this. And then for the next 20 years on the bench, every single time he votes on that particular issue or anything even remotely associated with it, he's voting that way.
Yeah.
You know, and that to me is a big problem. I don't know how you can control for that. You know, again, you end up kind of going back to the question of, do we want to have the justices elected? But then it becomes an idiotic popularity contest, and you're electing people who are utterly and completely unqualified cause for the bench.
Well, I think so. Here's the thing. I honestly, Trump deserved both impeachments that he got. He deserved to be ousted at the first one. He obviously wasn't. So impeachment as a tool has lost a lot of its power because it's crystal clear. It doesn't matter how guilty someone is; they can still stay in power, and that's a problem. And that wasn't what was intended with the impeachment system. But having said that, now, because it's like now everybody's starting to impeach everybody in Congress. So like, I'm going to go for your impeachment. It's like, oh my God, it's going to be completely meaningless after that because it's like, it's just, 6 people said we should impeach this person. Well, we call that Tuesday. But nobody is taking that seriously for several members of the court.
We're mirroring Rome. We really are. Because it used to be, anytime somebody was sent to the provinces to rule, you know, one of the provinces, or be the tax collector for Gaul or the road constructor for Illyrium or whatever, literally as soon as they got back in Rome, because they couldn't be prosecuted when they were still serving overseas. But the moment they came into Rome again, boom, they were hit with the a whole raft of accusations, and they had to defend themselves against these charges in the Senate. And it was simply because that was the way business was done. And we're kind of approaching that level where all we do is we accuse and impeach people, but then nothing really happens to them.
Well, and so you're going to need, when you have a campaign, an election campaign, you're going to need a defense campaign with it. So it's like, I'm not in office yet, but donate to my defense campaign so that when I'm out of office, I can, defend myself. But the sad thing,
I was going to say, the system is broken. I think most of us on both sides of the fence know it. It's how we want the system to be restructured to be fair, and I use the air quotes there, to be what we feel is what would work best for the country. Nobody can agree on that because we each have different views, and that's not just on left and right. That's across the whole spectrum.
So two comments on that. First of all, I think we disagree far less than it looks. The problem isn't the disagreement, but I'll get to that in a second. The funny thing about this is, so with all of these impeachment calls, nobody's credibly calling for the impeachment of several. Let's start with Thomas. There's no way that Thomas should not be impeached and removed. I think if you were to talk to any of the founding fathers, which apparently most modern conservatives feel that they commune with them, they know what they meant, they know what they want, and I've read the Federalist Papers, so I can tell you that this is what the founding fathers
they have a copy of the Federalist Papers that they kept next to their bedstand for a day or two.
No, They read the Federalist Papers. They all do that. It's the cover. It says the Federalist Papers. There, I have now read, literally, the Federalist Papers. As soon as you've read the cover, you've read it. But at any rate, okay, bad joke. There's no joke. These people should absolutely be impeached. That's what the process is for, and none of them. Thomas has done so many things that either are illegal or should absolutely be illegal and would be illegal if he was in any position but the Supreme Court. And that's just unacceptable. Exactly. And they used to be unacceptable to conservatives. So that's the first thing. I think actually most conservatives, if they weren't getting pulled by MAGA and if they weren't getting pulled by the loud talking heads who are just like, well, we're all under attack constantly by liberals and by people who want to, communism and who want to make your child trans or all of these other things. And if the really loudest elements on the right just shut up, I think there is enough overlap that we could reasonably find compromise and go forward. I think the problem is compromise has been turned into weakness to the point that even though there actually is significant overlap on common sense solutions to so many issues, we cannot do it because that has been prohibited, because that's not what's good for the individuals. That's not what's good for Marjorie Taylor Greene. Compromise and success as a country is not good for Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's not good for and anyone else in that party. The more the country succeeds, the harder it is for them. Yeah.
Part of it is, I think, the Republicans looked at the demographics of the country and realized that with trends going the way they were, both demographic and social trends, that they needed to find some group to be that loyal base that could get them through everything. And that's what MAGA effectively is. It was that one group that they knew they could bring in that would mobilize, the religious ultra-conservatives, the racists, the everybody else, the gun nuts, all of those people under one hat. Because that suddenly gave them enough of a solid base that if you could somehow flex the campaigning just enough, you'd get a majority and you'd be able to get in. Without that base, they have no chance whatsoever, and they know it. So they basically made that deal with the devil. And now what's happened is, like I'm sure the German army and the industrialists felt, in 1936, after the Nazis had been in power, oh, shit, we're no longer running the show. They own it. You know, and I think that's kind of where they are, because you can't say anything against those views now without immediately being primaried out. You'll lose your office.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
Your political life is over. And given the tenor of the times, your life may be over too.
Given my
literally,
given how much I despise Dick Cheney, and frankly, I think you have even more reason than anyone I've ever met to hate the guy. The fact that I'm like, and I know her politics. Although the other thing is, Liz Cheney has shown herself willing to change her views. Dick Cheney, only once that I've ever seen, and it's because his daughter was gay. That's what it took for him, and he didn't do it publicly. He refused to really, in any meaningful sense, really do anything positive for that. But okay, so but Liz Cheney was just like, okay, I disagree with her in every meaningful way, but here she was, just destroyed her family name, destroyed her career, destroyed all of it to do the fucking right thing. That's what we're missing on both sides. Well, less on the left, but in my view, in my humble opinion. But
yes, but I think both sides are that way to some extent, because the power, the influence, the money, the perks, the status, everything that comes from being in an elected or honestly appointed federal office is so huge that people basically toss their morals in the garbage tin once they get elected.
And I think it happens in a different way on the left, but I think what happens is, okay, so the left is feeling to become more extreme, more divisive on our side, because that's the only way to fight the extremists on the other side. So extremism begets extremism. And it turns out into this vicious cycle. Yeah.
I look at a situation of, say, Feinstein or Pelosi. Those are the ones that come to mind, and I know there are many others. You know, people who are literally freaking ancient. They have no touchstone with the people who are in the actual working classes, that are the ones that need reform of the system so they can actually have a decent life. And so why are they still elected? It's because the powers that be have realized it doesn't really matter which party controls the two chambers or is in the White House. All that matters is you have the right mindset of how things are supposed to go, which is don't change the system, because as long as the system stays the way it is, it's easy for them to manipulate it to their own advantage.
One of the first things I learned about raising children, never say no to a child. Never say, no, you can't have that. What you do is you redirect them with what they can have, or how they can control it with the illusion of control. So it's like, okay, the child has to take a nap now, and they have zero. They will not take a nap, right? They will just they will take out the little squirt gun and be like, okay, Dad, I'm going to pop one in you if you. So they don't want the nap. So what you do is you say, listen, I had a great idea. After the nap, would you like to have a snack or watch television? So you've just...
Excuse me.
No worries.
Keep talking.
Okay. So you've given this illusion of control, and it's like that now they focus on the part that they can control, which is, oh, wow. You mean after my nap? And it's like, if you had said instead, it's time for a nap, it's like, no, I'm not tired. I'm not going to take... So you just sit there and say, listen, after your nap, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? And all of a sudden they feel in control, not realizing they've given you the only thing you cared about. They were going to have that choice after the nap. Either way, it doesn't matter. They've now had the nap. And I swear to God, it's the same thing. It's like, well, you can choose to get upset over this social issue or that social issue or this economic issue or that economic issue, so long as you don't realize that you're still paying into a system where in either the left or the right, you're actually still for that system. Is that roughly it?
Yeah.
So in this analogy, we're all the children, and the powers that be are the parents, saying, it's like as long as you're still.
Do you want the American flag on the stamp, or do you want a daisy on the stamp?
Yeah,
I'd like you to reform the post office. No. We'll do that as soon as you choose which of these stamps you would.
Exactly. Or we can't reform the post office yet because we haven't decided. Yeah, exactly. On are the stamps, we have to figure out, because obviously global warming is more important. So we have to figure out, should we go back to the stamps that you have to lick because that's actually somewhat more environmentally friendly, or should we keep the glue, which is easier, but we have to solve that problem? Yeah. I forget what
you wanted us to be green, so we're getting rid of those old Jeeps, and we're going to buy $1 million a copy things that pollute only slightly less than the Jeeps, but that will make you happy. But it makes the company that made them and all the investors and the CEOs very happy.
It's really everybody. It's their David Copperfield. It's just like, okay, I want you to look over here. Well, and I try to be careful because we started to get into these somewhat more vagaries, and I get worried about that because that's also how you can direct people. It's like, by the way, there's somebody who's oppressing you. You know who it is? It's the immigrants. I'm not going to tell you how they're oppressing you. Well, they're taking your jobs, I guess. But I'm not going to tell you how they're taking your jobs because those aren't really jobs you were going to do anyway. Really,
I love the joke. I love the joke that goes with that, which is, there's the man with a giant heap of cookies on his plate, a guy over there with one cookie on his plate, and another guy with no plate at all. And the guy with the mound of cookies is leaning over and telling the guy with the one cookie, be careful, he'll steal your cookie.
Yeah. Oh, I like that one. That's a good one. I should try to...
Yeah, but I mean, that's literally what American politics has become, is find somebody weaker that you can blame for everything while I continue to rip you off and sodomize you.
And sorry, the imagery threw me there for a second. And I mean, yeah, there is always going to be that to some degree in every system. And we were just talking about just now. For Russia, it's qualitatively different. It's not just orders of magnitude different. There's that too, but it's qualitatively different, which is why the U.S. has been relatively stable for 200 years. Russia has been relatively stable for a couple of years or so, maybe, and everybody's been miserable as fuck the entire time. But it does. The biggie is, and I forget, somebody did a calculation, and I'm now working off of memory from something I saw a few years ago. You may have seen it or something similar that roughly said, okay, one maybe not causal but corollary factor in revolutions is actually the disparity between the pay of those at the bottom and those at the top. And when it gets past a certain, like 1,000 times or whatever the amount is, that's when you can start to see a revolution coming. And they just sort of correlated from Rome all the way to sort of now the proportional difference between those at the bottom and those at the top. And the U.S. has like basically exceeded that revolutionary one a short time ago. And I found that interesting.
It's interesting, but the other corollary that goes with that is the fact that the overwhelming majority of revolutions are triggered not by horrible conditions, but when those in power take away something that the people already have. Can be tiny, but that's what triggers the whole thing to just crash.
Now, of course, it's it's really like uncouth when somebody like quotes themselves like, oh, let me get this great author from this great book and quote there was a line.
Yeah. And who is the author? Pray
Who is
tell.
I don't know. I have no idea who wrote this just amazing book on economics and many of these exact problems. But what was it? Money buys. I think the line was, well, what was hilarious. This was one of the most touching moments of all on YouTube. I'll tell you about this one in a second, but I try not to cop to this one too, because I was like, how old am I getting that happened? But the line was something to the effect of really the only, past a certain point, money buys only one thing, just one thing, and that's the ability to avoid the consequences for your actions. And that's, when you hit that point, that's when you've got the problem. So it's not about buying food. It's about buying the ability to avoid the consequences for your actions. And I had like weeks to write the line, so it's put much better in here than I remembered. I also remember one time being on a stream, somebody wanted to talk about the downsides of capitalism, and I was on a panel. There was a whole bunch of people, and he ended every single show with a quote from somebody. And every show he ended with a quote. And he starts this quote, and it sounded so familiar. And I was just like, oh my God. It's like, what is that? That almost sounds like Roosevelt. Was that Roosevelt? Was it? I was like, you know what? If this was a really great quote, though, I said, I bet you it won't go. But if it was a great quote, the next thing it'll mention is this. And boom, I mentioned that. I was like, oh, wow, I really like this quote. I was like, who the fuck? I know this line, but where is it from? And I'm trying to think of, like, all these people. And it was like Nicholas Lamar, Suitor, the Water Thief. I was like, whoa! I was like, oh, shit. Oh.
Yeah, I'm brilliant.
I was like, yeah, no wonder I liked the line. And it was it was touching because, you know, he did a different quote every time. It never crossed my mind. It quote the book. It also meant that he had read it, and it was appropriate to exactly what he had picked the right line. So I knew he had read the book. But I was touched. But it was also just a little weird because it's just like, wow. I mean, I wrote it a long time ago. But it was just like, wow, I was like, am I getting senile? So, no, I've written a lot of shit. I was like, I've written a lot. And what is it they say? All good writers borrow from other people. Great writers steal outright. And it's like, other people have said similar things. And as I was going through it, what a lot of my inspirations will be, I will watch a show or a movie, and I'll say, that was a great concept, and oh my God, did they fuck it up. They executed it poorly. How would I have done it? And then I just start to build off of that. And then all of a sudden I got a whole novel based off of one little idea that I thought somebody else could have, you know. So we all, and that's what I was doing as I was listening to this. I was like, this is great, but I doubt that this line is really going to go where I think it should go. So I'm starting in my head to reconstruct how, and then it does. I was just like, oh, wow. So it's really weird to reconstruct my own argument as I was, oh, wow. Yeah, but anyways, something. Money buys nothing so well as. Oh, I think that was the line. Money buys. It's at the end when he's talking with some of the best lines in the whole thing are at the end when he's talking to the executive and he's being tortured, so called. But money buys nothing so well as. Oh Jesus! Money buys nothing so well as immunity from. Immunity from the consequences of your actions, something along those lines. I don't. At some point, I'll have to. Titan just good artists borrow, greater artists steal. At some point, I'm going to have to read it because it's like I'd love to refamiliarize myself with it. And there's another edition that was going to come out really in the end. Afterward to the second edition, I felt just sort of summarized my whole view. It was right after the whole LIBOR scandal, and I was just like, okay, yeah, and then it was starting to come true. People were selling futures, and that all stopped. I thought that was going to continue, but like, there's still a company that, okay, if you can't afford college, they'll pay for your college, but they will get a percentage of your earnings for a percent number of years or whatever. And I was just like, oh, here we go. All right. Well, anyway, at some point I'll go over the lines. Parking ticket is a fine for the poor, but a rental ticket in Sweden, where the parking fines are any kind of fine issued for a moving violation or by the government is actually proportionate to whatever your income is, which is, there's also the CEOs that like make only $1 and everything else. I mean, there are ways around it, but at least that's better.
Can't find me for that.
Yeah. Well, okay, there's one. Like, I agree with, I have to agree with conservatives and the ultra wealthy who say you can't tax net worth. You can't, because net worth is almost illusionary in most cases. What's his name? Not Zuckerberg. His net worth is nothing like what it is on paper, and you'll never know his net worth until it's sort of, his net worth is Schrodinger's net worth. It exists when you try to identify it, or when he actually tries to realize it. Until he realizes it, nobody's got any idea what it really is.
Exactly.
So, oh dear Lord. All right. Well, Ed, what are your thoughts on what you're going to be asking Starsky tomorrow? I can think of a few things, but and obviously I'm going to be curious to know what his view is on the coup. Although my suspicion is he's going to be delighted, but he's also going to say, oh, it's great. Of course this happened. It's going to happen again. But it's also sort of like water under the bridge. It's like, they've got a war to fight and they're back on. So I don't know. He's going to have much to say about it.
Well, to me, the big questions that I would want to ask Starsky tomorrow are, how is the preliminary phase of the offensive progressing in your estimation? And the other one that I think is really interesting is a question of what happens after the war for Ukraine.
Do you think?
What are the?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I was going to say, what are the key issues that Ukraine will need to confront? Because there are a whole bunch of problems that have basically been completely shoved to the back burner, forgotten about, whatever you want to call it, that prior to the war were huge problems in Ukraine, and suddenly they're irrelevancies because of the existential crisis of fighting the war. But once that's done, what next? There's the whole issue of rebuilding, and that's going to be huge. There's also going to be the issue of how do you provide for Ukrainian security in the post-war period. I know everybody's thinking and hoping that they'll be allowed into NATO, but they might not.
Well, and the urgency.
What do you do?
The people who say right now, let's bring them into NATO once the war is over, let's bring them into NATO was during the war. Now we have practical things that maybe. So,
but there's other issues. I mean, NATO requires a certain amount, or is supposed to require a certain amount of your gross product, gross national product, goes towards defense. And true, that's more commonly ignored than it is, but at least for new member states, they're given a period where they're watched closely to show that they're at least making progress towards doing that. When the Germans are supposed to pay 3% and drop down below 1%, they're the Germans, and they'll get back on board at some point. Yeah. But when you're, say, Poland or Lithuania, right after getting admitted to NATO, they're doing a pretty close magnifying glass inspection on that kind of stuff. So you have to meet those requirements and others of, what's the level of your training, what's the level of your enforcement of the protocols of war, the law of war, all of those issues. So they may not actually qualify to be admitted into NATO unless they're given dispensations. And I always get nervous when you start down the dispensation road, because the next steps are to say, well, we'll let these guys in. And, Yeah. Central African Republic that, murdered 100,000 people last year. They can be in NATO. That's fine. We don't care.
Sweden had the Quran burnings like a couple days ago, which I wonder.
Probably didn't help their case.
yeah. Well, and I imagine you're Sweden. Okay, it's they want to be a free country, but I was like, do they sit there and say, okay, can you save that for just a couple of weeks from now? Like push that back, or do they just arrest them because it's gonna? I'm starting to think that Turkey is ultimately going to block them. I think now there's a greater than 50-50 Sweden's not going to make it, and if it's Sweden of all fucking countries can't make it, and I was thrilled at the idea of Sweden being in NATO. I think it's a really good idea, and I think it's greater than 50-50 now that they're not going to get in.
Yeah, and the tragedy is that of the two countries, 2.5 if you want to count Ireland, that are being considered for NATO membership, they're the only ones that honestly brought a significant force structure to the table with them.
Yes.
The Finns have a good self-defense force, but again, it's one of those, like Ukraine. Oh, they can be in Helsinki in 3 days. They learned in 1939 that doesn't really work, but nonetheless. So I understand why the Turks are upset. I get it. But let's be honest, I'm sure there are plenty of instances where there's anti-Christian activity in Turkey, and none of the Christian members of NATO are making a stink over that.
And it's a defensive, it's a military organization. It's not a political one. And I know it's hard for the people in Turkey to recognize that distinction, but to block Sweden of all fucking countries based on a political and I think now it's probably they're gonna get blocked.
But I also think a lot of it is Erdogan.
Yeah.
I think if you'd had a different leader, it wouldn't have been an issue, or at least not a significant one. Objections would have been voiced, but they probably would have said, okay, we'll vote for it. But Erdogan, because he's having such a tough time, he needed for the election to come out as the defender of Islam and Turkey and everything else. So he had to be really stick in the mud about the whole thing.
Given that, so two more questions that I can think of. There was one in the live chat that I think is a good one to pass on. Given that, I mean, I find it very hard to be as confident as I was even just a few months ago. A few months ago, I was confident that Ukraine would sail through on membership, and it seems to me so obvious how and why, and that they can contribute. I think they've proven quite easily that they can contribute. I'm not as convinced anymore. I think after the war and after the urgency is over, I am concerned about whether or not that make NATO membership, even if they qualify, which I think you brought an excellent point that they may not.
Yeah. But, I mean, those are the kind of questions I would ask him, because I think those are important at this point, because I won't say, to use that ridiculous Churchill quote, this isn't the beginning of the end. It's not even, I don't remember the exact thing, but it is the end of the beginning. I think we have reached that point where we're no longer in the beginning of the war. We are in the mid-stage. And smart combatants at the highest political levels aren't looking at managing the fight going on now. They're looking at managing the fight that will come in the next stage. So that's something I would hope that most Ukrainians, but specifically Zelensky and the other major power brokers, are actually thinking about of where do we want this country to go, and how are we going to get ourselves to that point. I think that's important.
That's a great question. I was sort of thinking it, but I hadn't even thought about asking. I mean, the reality is, my understanding is, the reason Turkey is in NATO, really, what Turkey brings to NATO is the ability to launch attacks in the Middle East off of Turkish air bases. I mean, it's because, so even though we disagree on just about fucking everything, with them in NATO, all of a sudden NATO can project power in ways it otherwise couldn't do. Is that roughly accurate?
Not readily. It is
Yes.
and it isn't. It depends on timing, because the nature of what Turkey brought to the table for NATO has evolved over time.
Mm.
Initially, the main focus was that it would give NATO a way to threaten the Russian flank through the Caucasus and the Black Sea. And that was very important during the Cold War period. Since then, yes, what you're talking about is important as well. The whole idea of that Turkey gives you access to a number of bases that are, close to Syria, close to Iraq, etc. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that Turkey also, as a member of NATO, gives NATO a degree of influence with other Islamic countries.
Mm.
Because the US or Britain or Italy or whoever couldn't approach Libya, for example, directly. The relationship was much too hostile. But Turkey, being a fellow Islamic state, and one who had at one time had connections to, because the empire extended that far, had connections with that country, they could approach and broach issues with the Libyans or the Egyptians or the Syrians or whoever that nobody else could. So that's an important element that a lot of people fail to realize. But at the same time, Turkey has evolved. When Turkey first joined, it was still in the post-Turkish formation of the Turkish Republic phase. So the secularists were the ones who really controlled a lot of what went on in Turkey. And the Islamicists resented that and have been slowly and continuously making progress to purging the secularization of Turkish society. Kind of like, we've got with our MAGA types. we're a Christian nation, damn it.
Oh,
yeah, there are a lot of people that aren't, but nonetheless, the foundation of much of what happens here is based off of that. And the same thing applies to Turkey. So Erdogan has kind of capitalized on that. And he has ties with the Islamicist movement. And earlier in Turkish history, the military, it was actually written into the Turkish constitution. The military are the guardians of its secular Turkish state. And if they see that the government is moving away from that, it is their responsibility to stage a coup and overthrow the government.
I remember that. And I think Israel actually has a similar, does it not? Or
I can't speak for Israel, but I know Turkey did. And there were 3 times in Turkish history when the military did just that. It stood up and said, enough of this bullshit. We're taking over. We will hold elections in the specified period. And it's, again, specified in the Constitution how long it must be till the military holds regular elections again. And they elected a civilian government after they corrected the moves that were going in the wrong direction.
Interesting.
And one of the things Erdogan and the Islamicists have done is basically purge the military of any of those secularist senior officers.
I laughed.
So that safety valve has basically been disconnected from the entire piping system.
Oh God! The machinations. Oh dear Lord! You could spend a lifetime looking at all the machinations of all of these countries: the U.S., Russia, Turkey. Holy! It is our human beings are water. We find the cracks in any political system and just start to disassemble the shit and make it up as we go along. I laughed earlier because Doorknob I said, okay, so if you go to Google and say, why is Turkey, the autocorrect will fill in, why is Turkey in NATO? That's the big question now. So let me ask you one last question, and I think it's a really good question. I hadn't even thought of it. Do you know anything about the Ukrainian constitution, and is it something that is sufficient for a more Western country going forward? I don't know anything about the Ukrainian constitution.
I know very little about it. I know that after the Maidan, they did some selective editing, shall we say, to make it more Western leaning. But it certainly still has a fair amount of Russian-ish influence. Russian isn't the right term. Let's say post-communist influence. I think they're realizing how flawed and broken that system is, and they're moving to make changes. But how they get there is, that's a problem they have to deal with, along with so many other things.
I heard this half tongue-in-cheek, but honestly, speaking of end runs around rules, I assume this was a really bad idea, but honestly, it seems like basically while Biden was in Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky should have just gone up to him, slapped him, said, "I declare war on the U.S." He should have said, "Okay, NATO responds." Zelensky should have said, "We surrender." NATO says, "Okay, Ukraine is now under the control of NATO." And, any attack on Ukraine is essentially an attack on NATO because NATO owns Ukraine. Ukraine is unconditionally surrendered to NATO.
We have temporarily annexed Ukraine.
We've annexed, yeah.
Militarize it.
Yeah, and then...
look, there are Russians here. We got to get rid of them somehow.
And that's also, by the way, great pretext for, okay, we're going to rewrite your constitution. I don't know how the Ukrainians would feel about this. I don't think Russia would recognize it, so I think Russia would probably just keep doing what they're doing. So then NATO would be in one hell of a bind. But I really do like the idea. I think it's imaginative, and it's the kind of out of the box idea that I don't think that's even remotely credible. But what are your thoughts?
It's kind of ridiculous. Yes, like you said. I think you have to go back and look at the example of Japan and Germany at the end of the war, World War II, and how we transitioned the two great fascist countries into democracies. And a lot of people forget that both of those countries, prior to them becoming those autocratic states, had actually been at least semi-democracies. Even under the Kaiser, Imperial Germany did have a parliament that met and had to approve stuff, and there were different parties. It was a quasi-democratic system. Same thing in Japan. So those traditions could be kind of returned to, and if you look at the constitutions of both countries today, they resemble to some degree those earlier constitutions. They're heavily changed, but you can see the foundations that were built in those earlier periods. The problem you have with Russia, and by extension Ukraine, those documents, those traditions didn't exist. So how do you get them to that point? Well, many countries, again, back to Germany and back to Japan, pre-war, they had gone and kind of, for lack of a better word, plagiarized significant portions of the U.S. Constitution and borrowed those things and borrowed from British tradition in constituting. I mean, Britain doesn't really have a constitution. It has traditions that have been ingrained in the political system, and they brought some of those in as well, or they brought in part of the Napoleonic system. That's how those things happen. I'm sure that to some extent is what happened with Ukraine in terms of them putting together their constitution. But just like ours, you know, how many amendments did we had to have, and how much debate over various laws do we have? Same thing with them. They're going to have to keep editing that document to suit current needs without forfeiting the past that got them to where they are, or being bound by the restrictions of worshiping that past when it no longer has relevance today.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you stopped in for a casual
the
chat.
world problems? Yes.
Yeah, well, it's not just the way. It's like it's well, no, it's there's nuance to all of it, which is what I think what makes it a delight to think about and be interested in. But it's like, yeah, we're gonna have a nice casual fireside chat. So let's talk about what's wrong with capitalism. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I think that's a question we should ask Starsky. I think we should ask him what he thinks about the Constitution, and or what does anybody talk about the Constitution and say that there are any elements of it that they think need to be revised. It may be that, like, the average Ukrainian isn't thinking about that right now, but that question just came up. I was like, I hadn't thought about that. You had mentioned on the Discord that they need to be planning now for what they're going to do after the war is over, and I was just like, that's got to be a huge part of it, and that didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah.
All right.
Alrighty. Well, I have a few chores I need to attend to, sir.
Yes, sir, and I need to get going. I'm sure there's, like, school's out, so I'm sure the kids are up, so I'm going to open the doors, and normally it would be nice and quiet. The dog would look at me. Instead, two girls would go, Daddy, let's do D&D, or whatever they're going to want to do. I don't know. We'll see. They're trying to get me into the latest cartoon that is, I don't know what it is, but it's like, okay, at least it's not Dora, but still. All right. Really good to see you. Thank you so much, Lance. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern. In time, and we'll talk to Starsky, and thank you all in the live chat for joining us. Some really great questions, and thank you once again, everybody who helped us get to 1,000. I really appreciate it, and it's beyond that. It's like we got to 1,000. I submitted the request to YouTube, and 2 minutes after I did that, we dropped to 998. I was like, do I have a sock account somewhere? What do I have? How do we? And it's still the numbers got back. I don't know what happened. YouTube, I think there's somebody at YouTube who's just like, let's fuck with these guys. Let's just, they fuck with all the channels. I think that's what it is. It's like you wake up one morning, all your content's gone, and they're that guy from Airplane, the movie Airplane, that guy who like yoinks the landing lights just as the plane's coming down, and like look at each other with it. Yeah, just kidding. Just kidding. Exactly. That's Google. Yes. Only also genuinely like evil. All right. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, in time for Operator Starsky's Ukraine update. Thank you all so much, and see you tomorrow.
Out here.